Okay, Bobby. Thank you, Grand Chief. Okay, Deputy Chief Bobby Narcisse.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, chiefs, delegates, and everyone participating online in the virtual forum as well. Welcome back to the Assembly. This afternoon I'll be talking about education, and education is one of my, is another very important portfolio of mine that we like to present on, and also the fact that it requires some direction. And we've been reviewing and studying the file for the past, I was on a roll. Sorry.
Sorry to cut you off, but if we can lower the chit-chat and... okay, there you go. He was on a roll, he said.
Okay, so I guess everybody's coming back in. I think we have some guests out there as well. So hopefully we could get those people in, and also everybody on the virtual platform. Yes, what was I saying? Oh, education, yes. I do have the education file, and it's a very important file. And we've been examining and reviewing and looking at what's been happening over the past few months since this new executive got in, and building on the work that's been happening over the years with respect to education. So I'm here to do a little presentation as well. I'd like to acknowledge my education team, my Director of Education, Andrew Solomon, who's over here as well. And his team as well, and all the good work that's been happening over the past few years. And they've been very instrumental in supporting me getting up to speed in terms of the education priorities and moving ahead with Nishnawbe Aski Nation. I've been working within education for a while myself. I don't know if many of you remember, I used to be the recreation and coaching director at Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School under Northern Nishnawbe Education Council. So I was there for a few years working with our students from all across NAN territory in Treaty 5 and Treaty 9. And it's my distinct pleasure to work with many of our partners over the years as well. I like to also acknowledge the education directors and education institutions across Nishnawbe Aski Nation and all the work that we're doing here. So moving on with my presentation here, I do have a PowerPoint here, and it's entitled Education Reset. You know, we want to reset the education file, we want to reset the education bilateral discussions that is happening across our territories. We want to respect ongoing work that's happening regionally within your own specific tribal councils as well. We want to have an opportunity to say, okay, how could we reset the table, bring back our education partners back to really look at what we have, what we need, and what we want. So basically my presentation looks at this roadmap that I just want to take you through in the next 4 hours. No, I was kidding. No, this, it won't take that long, probably 45 minutes. So we're going to do the education reform, just making sure you guys are paying attention. Education reform timeline, the current issues in education reform, the lessons from successful reform efforts currently at Nishnawbe Aski Nation, and also we want to bring back the Chiefs Committee and the next steps for education reset. So looking at the education reform timeline, let's take a walk back and see where we've come, where we've been, and where we're going. So I just want to, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I know in 1999, the Framework Agreement on agenda and process and negotiate agreement in principle AIP was started on, the framework agreement. In 2013, that memorandum of understanding between NAN and Canada addressed institutional reform rather than structural reform, and that's a big thing that we really want to revisit. In 2018, the agreement in principle signed on the recognition of NAN's lawmaking authority regarding education. January 2022, I sent a letter when I was learning about the file and getting information regarding the file and what's happening. I sent a letter to Minister Hadju expressing disappointment in the slow pace of reform and requesting a meeting on potential education reset negotiations. All due respect, with all the negotiations that's happened since 1999, I know that, Chiefs, I think you'd agree with me too, our institutions, our funding, our infrastructure needs are still well underfunded. We're still looking at ways to cut corners for our children, for our youth that are going through the education process. So I dispatched that letter, basically underlining our frustration within on the time frame and the slow pace of reform. So in March 2022, I had a meeting with Minister Hadju. We sought and gained support for the Education Reset Table from Indigenous Services Canada. It's a good thing too because we know Minister Hadju. I used to go to the Labour Centre dances back in the day where, she used to run the shelter house, and so she knows a little bit about the experience about our First Nation communities, especially within Thunder Bay, but in other areas as well. So we're able to convene a meeting and say, come on, let's do some substantial work here. Let's have some decision makers at the table. So that was the basic thing. Like, we can't be spending our time having our leadership, our directors, and our education department dealing with low-level functionaries that always say, okay, well, I have to take this back to the minister or whoever. And, we know we don't have time for that. Our children do not have time for that. And we owe it to them to really, have a significant process for education reform. So April 2022, we always have to have a rules of engagement whenever we're dealing with Indigenous Services Canada. So we're proposing terms of reference for education reset table be drafted. And so we're currently awaiting Canada's response on the terms of reference. So it is looking very favorable in terms of establishing this step and moving forward. Next slide, please. So issues in education reform, like I said before, in 24 years, chiefs, delegates, nearly 2 generations of children from K to 12 have entered and left the school system, does not serve them effectively. Just close to 60% of our students are graduating, countless studies, hundreds of recommendations, slow change. Nishnawbe Aski Nation learners have a right to a safe, effective, culturally relevant education. And like I said before, the absence of decision makers at negotiation tables have slowed progress. So efforts and so the pace of reform in education is unacceptable, as it says in the slide. And I think your education institution and directors and your leadership around the table would agree that the pace of reform is unacceptable. Efforts in other sectors have achieved successful reforms in moving towards that area. We believe, and we want to bring to you, that education requires similar leadership to make similar progress. Chiefs' involvement is vital in improving the pace of reform. So what lessons from other successes can we apply to education in the tables that we have? And we're bringing in a lot of the experiences that we had through our progress through the Child and Family Services Reform, through the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, also with the 7 Youth Inquest. Okay, that was a very powerful evaluation of what's happening. I want to mention like the inquest hearing convened in respect to the tragic deaths, and I want to say these people's names, because they cannot be forgotten. And they were the ones that experienced all these different traumas within education system. Those people are Jethro Anderson, Curran Strang, Paul Panichees, Robin Harper, Reggie Bushy, Kyle Morriso, Jordan Wabass. Let those names still linger in terms of the work that needs to happen. Let it be a testament that the work that our leadership needs to really still work on to keep the government and both levels of government to task on the recommendations that the 7 Youth Inquest came out of. NAN played a central role in negotiating the inquest and participating in the public interest party. So we have also, I want to acknowledge our legal department here. I'd like to call upon Julian Faulkner, who has also represented Nishnawbe Aski Nation and chiefs during the 7 Youth Inquest to bring a more just a technical level, a legalese level in terms of the impact and also the inquest recommendation, how it's going to guide the work that we need to do. So Mr. Julian Faulkner, please.
Thank you, Deputy, and Chiefs and Proxy. I want to start by acknowledging the drum and the sacred items, the Elders Council, the youth. I want to acknowledge the NAN executive and how certainly impressed I am with the effectiveness of your assembly. Chiefs, Proxies, it's little. There's little good news when we talk about inquests, recommendations, and implementation. There needs to be some truth-telling about these exercises. I represent kind of a scourge on the system, right? It's my legal fees out of an inquest that I have to be accountable for, right? Like I get asked to do these inquests, to work with NAN to develop these recommendations, and I did so with my team and NAN Education Department at the time, Deputy Grand Chief Achni Peneskim at the time Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler. We have 145 recommendations, and I'm about to tell you, since that inquest in June 2016, genuinely where we're at in terms of the 145 recommendations that impact education, right? And you heard Deputy Grand Chief speak to the generations of children that are right now doing without while things don't move. So first of all, I want to emphasize that there are partnerships that are aimed at implementation. There's committees that are set up aimed at implementation. There is an enormous amount of busy work going on. But the process, and I mean no disrespect to anybody, but the process isn't working respectfully. NAN Education Department staff have helped us. The what you would call low-hanging fruit, the short-term changes, they've happened, but the serious policy and institutional change is paralyzed. Aboriginal Legal Services, the Legal Services Agency, is responsible for issuing a report card every year on the recommendations and how they're doing. Interestingly enough, this report card that's over 400 pages long shows recommendations completed even if they're not. Now, how does that happen? Because if one party does their part, they use the box completed, even if Canada hasn't or somebody else hasn't. Next slide, please. And so and then there's these in progress. So these are just some of the recommendations. I'll quickly go through them. The issue of providing additional core funding to expand existing facilities and build new facilities. I mean, this is not rocket science. Where's the money? Where are the buildings? It's not done. It's called in progress, right? Provide funding to construct, enlarge, and refurbish. It's marked complete, but it's not complete because Canada hasn't finished its end. But it's marked complete on the report card. Revise INAC policies to cover costs. And my slide is cut off at the bottom, but I think that's marked as in progress if my memory serves me correctly. And no, sorry, that one's marked complete. Again, the parties haven't actually finished it. This is the report card. Under recommendation 123 that's marked in progress, Ontario is to engage with First Nation communities to identify opportunities to share information expertise to support capacity building within the schools. Bottom line, and it's enough to say this, that the difficulty is that whether you're talking about the 7 Youth Inquest, whether you're talking about the myriad of reports that have been done to date on the failures to put Indigenous children on the same level as other children in the country, there is a 100% easy grade that I can give it, right, in the Faulkner report card. Failure. It hasn't happened. Minister Haidu's committed to this education reset table. She commented in the meeting on the failure to follow through on recommendations. The education reset table will have decision makers at the table and will oversee all of the technical work currently ongoing. In other words, it's not meant to push aside important work. I see that negotiator Derek Chum's in the room in respect of education jurisdiction, and he's doing very important work on behalf of NAN. But unfortunately, when you look at the people at the table on the other side, with the greatest of respect, these are not decision makers. And so the idea is to create an oversight table in which these technical tables report and get direction. And so we ask for your support on that, and I'll turn it back over to Deputy Grand Chief at some of the lessons to be learned in respect of other reforms. So page 10.
Okay, thank you, Julian, for that. And you left your open water here on the.
Spilled everywhere.
See, we're doing a lot of reset
napkin
here at the
there?
table.
Yeah.
Let's go get a napkin.
Okay.
Sorry, I was just trying to get the deputy some liquid assets. Sorry. I'm here all week, folks.
Liquid assets.
All right, perfect.
You don't get electrocuted.
If I get electrocuted, my hair will get a little bit higher, but.
Here, Teresa's going to bring some Kleenex for you.
Okay, so moving ahead as well. So we want to look at wax on, wax off. There we go. My apologies, Chiefs. Okay, so there's some lessons learned in some of the negotiations that we've been having as well. For example, Choose Life. You know, we heard, we're going to be hearing tomorrow as well some of the work that we've been doing with Choose Life and how it's also developed at the community level. It's reflective of community needs, but how did Choose Life come about? You know, we have our representatives from Wapakika here as well, and like Wapakika First Nations applied for suicide prevention funding months before the tragic deaths of two 12-year-old girls, you know, Jolyn Winter and Chantel Fox. Canada said the application came at an awkward time in their funding cycle. Funding applications was approved days after the deaths. NAN leadership said never again and negotiated Choose Life, an expedited, user-friendly funding process. So Wapakika application became the template for the Choose Life application process. Next slide. So, significant lessons from the Choose Life process is the fact that there has been significant uptake and program success within NAN and Nishnawbe Aski Nation communities. Nishnawbe Aski Nation leadership negotiated long-term funding commitments and high-level Choose Life through an agreement in principle process. Negotiations now continuing through the final settlement agreement process to ensure and enshrine Choose Life would continue within Nishnawbe Aski Nation communities for years to come, and also to be developed at the community level on what the cultural needs are at the community level. Also, other areas that we found were successful in terms of moving ahead on our particular files as highlights from the Remoteness Quotient table, the RQ table. As you know, NAN intervened in the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal proceeding in 2016. NAN in Canada RQ table was mandated by CHRT order in 2017. So this established a respectful and productive working partnership with Indigenous Services Canada, looking at the true costs of delivering child and family services and prevention and moving ahead, and that work still is ongoing as I reported yesterday. NAN experts and ISK experts are now developing a remoteness quotient adjustment factor, the first ever First Nation cited evidence-based statistical model to measure and account for the increased costs of delivering services in remote communities. We say it all the time around the table, chiefs and everyone, that $1 in Thunder Bay is different than $1 in Attawapiskat, Bearskin, and we need to account for that. And our education systems also deserve that equity. You know, our children are depending on us for this, the up and coming next generation, our youth. So wins from the agreement in principle. First Nations Child and Family Services funding for NAN will be indexed to account for remoteness based on the RQ adjustment factor. As we mentioned yesterday, NARC, the National Assembly Remote Communities, is recognized and funded for 5 years, an opportunity for us to really have our collective voice across Canada with respect to remoteness issues. The NARC Canada Remoteness Table will take RQAF methodology national and beyond child and family services, because it just doesn't end there. We have to have these adjustment costs within health, within education, and that's what we want to try to push and present to you chiefs today. We are establishing a remoteness secretariat that will support our First Nations with data needs and best practices. You know, we need to have and own our own data systems that is totally reflective of the true needs and experience of our First Nation communities across Nishnawbe Aski Nation. And also, long-term funding and high-level table will be established for Choose Life. Next slide, please. So translating Choose Life, RQ, table, and agreement in principle successes into education, the current movement of the table that we have is a recommitment to education reset from NAN leadership in our NAN education department. We had a meeting with Minister Hadju. She's on board. Indigenous Services Minister's commitment to our reset table and our terms of reference. Okay, they said I should go faster for the Cree translation. I'm sorry. Go slower. So take a little breath here. Okay, so what's next? So I'm just so excited about this, you know, like there's this opportunity for really reform and reset and get a buy-in from our leadership as well. So pardon my enthusiasm, but yes. So what's next? Sign the terms of reference for education reset table. Negotiate streamline the funding process for our education needs. An important thing that we want to bring to you today and bring in a resolution is we recognize the important work from our other Chiefs Committee on Children, Youth, and Families that we have the Chiefs' direction. We bring it back to Chiefs in Assembly. We need to have the leadership input to guide the work that we do. So we want to reestablish a Chiefs Committee on Education. I think all of our leadership agree that education is very important. You know, you've said it many, many times before. And I think the best way to really move ahead is to involve our chiefs. And they'd report back to their respective tribal councils. We know we have to do better. I've said that again in terms of communication. But I think it's very important that we really reestablish a Chiefs Committee on Education that will help guide the process. And you will also have an opportunity to really bring those priorities to the national education reset table. Also, we need to some of the things that we have to work on is conclude education jurisdiction agreements, like establishing NAN or education authorities with delegated jurisdiction. Work with First Nations to develop a NAN education system. It doesn't have to be NAN. It could be something where the chiefs incorporate something as we move ahead. You know, this is still a work in progress. This is a reset table that we want to see what are some of the things that are happening regionally within your own education systems. Where can we, where's the opportunity where NAN could support current initiatives or step aside? You know, maybe there's things that are happening in different regions that you know, are doing well for your particular tribal council or education system. We have to identify and listen and take that feedback and direction from our leadership in moving ahead. Also, ensure that to conclude education jurisdiction funding agreements, also apply the RQ adjustment factor in moving ahead in developing any education system, but also taking into account that, you know, Nishnawbe Aski Nation is very diverse. We have many flying communities. We have also road access communities that have various levels of degrees of remoteness and access issues that we need to really take into consideration. Next slide. So with respect to, I just want to touch up on the education reset table terms of reference. You know, like this is what we're bringing to the NAN bilateral process. So the inherent rights and unique challenges of Nishnawbe Aski Nation. I won't go through it all, but Nishnawbe Aski Nation and Canada jointly recognize and affirm the inherent rights of First Nations to exercise jurisdiction over education in their territories. Okay, Nishnawbe Aski Nation communities face unique and significant challenges in the delivery of education programs and services. Next slide. You know, some of the guiding principles that will be shared at the reset table terms of reference include that the future of education for Nishnawbe Aski Nation learners must be grounded in remembrance, healing, and reconciliation for the impacted First Nations children, youth, and families, and all the survivors of Indian residential schools, Indian day schools, and the 60s scoop. The 7 sacred teachings to guide also the table's work. And also in terms of the mandate for the terms of reference would also include to oversee and guide reform of the education systems that serve Nishnawbe Aski Nation communities by reviewing and reforming the policy and funding frameworks that support those systems. And also, the parties to this table will focus primarily on the implementation rather than further studies that are committed to timely delivery on those recommendations that are jointly accepted as effective and achievable. We have studies. You know, our chief's always meant we've been studied to death on these different areas. Let's focus on practical action that is coming from our First Nations leadership by bringing back our education authorities, our tribal council education chairs, even our education directors from our First Nation communities themselves, you know, who are always, you know, fighting for resources, inequitable resources. And, you know, we're not just talking about K to 12. We're talking about early years, preschool. We're talking about post-secondary education. You know, like all of our citizens are lifelong learners. And they need to be also respected in that regard. And it's their inherent rights. It's the fiduciary responsibility of the Crown to ensure that they upkeep their responsibilities in our areas of education. And why do they get to dictate that? Because this needs to come from our leadership, our community members, you know, our families, our students, you know, in terms of asserting jurisdiction and determining how that education system is going to look with our own languages, with our own cultural practices. I'm reminded of a story that I was meeting with Charles Brown. He's an education director within our NAN nations. And he said that he was talking to one of the elders in his community. And he's wondering why his grandson was coming back to the community. And he goes to him in his language, "Why are you back so early? The school system is not finished." And then the student said, "Well, I failed. I failed my courses. They said I'm a failure, and they sent me home." So, and then the grandfather looks at him, "You're my grandson. I don't see you as a failure. I see you going fishing. I see you going hunting. I see you have respect for your elders. You know, you have a lot of friends. and you practice the way of life of our community, you are not a failure, you know? So, and in heeding in those elders' words, and I thank Charles Brown for allowing me to share that, is the fact that we need to develop our own education systems that reflect our needs. You know, why should we be, abiding by a provincial system that sets our students up for failure? And also recognizing our own institutions, our own post-secondary institutions. You know, getting our accreditation on our basis. And also, you know, there has to be some collaboration and negotiations happening with provincial education systems to ensure that our systems could be relevant if our students want to pursue education exploits in other jurisdictions as well. So those are different areas that we also want to really bring forth. So the table shall explore and critically assess the overall pace of reform to date and opportunities to establish accountability mechanisms for the pace of reform moving forward. We need to have their decision makers at the table as well. We can't waste our chiefs' time with lowly functionaries that are just there, bureaucrats, they're just there to listen and say, okay, well, we have to take it back and can't really make a decision here. So, no, you're chiefs, you're treaty rights holders, you deserve the respect from the Crown to have those individuals and decision makers from their side who will be listening to what's moving on there. So the role of existing education tables, I know we have tables that are there. Continue working at technical tables supporting education reset table. Also, in terms of we're looking at needs-based funding through the RQ. We want to work with our communities and our tribal councils to look at our priorities in those areas. And I'd like to perhaps propose when we do reestablish our committees moving ahead is considering to withdraw from provincial tables like the Ontario Technical Table interim funding approach that doesn't really meet the needs of our First Nations communities in education. I believe that it is our God-given right in terms of to develop a NAN-specific funding allocation that doesn't leave our students behind or education systems behind. And also work with NAN through the RQ table to develop Remoteness Quotient methodology for education. Next slide. So, like I said, we're coming here today to also ask for a resolution to reinstate and create a Chiefs Committee on Education. We need you, the Chiefs, involvement to improve the pace of reform. The Chiefs Committee on Education will guide and support the Education Reset Table negotiations and the technical tables under them. And as per the draft terms of reference for the Chiefs Committee on Education, this committee shall help ensure that the collective education needs of Nishnawbe Aski Nation students are met by providing timely and appropriate NAN First Nations political direction to support education issues in NAN territory. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Wow. I was hoping for a lot more and all that.
Handed out the terms of reference to them, which are attached to the resolution.
Okay. So we are asking for a resolution, Chiefs. You'll also find a copy of the terms of reference within your resolution package as well for your input in moving ahead. But we do, I think we've heard it today as well in terms of, with respect to our new executive and moving ahead. I know we have to go back to the roots of Nishnawbe Aski Nation of being an advocacy organization, being a tool and a resource for our chiefs to further important negotiations in these areas. And I'm here to pledge the fact that as portfolio holder of the education file, I'll be looking for direction and mandates from the leadership and taking direction in when we are doing these negotiations as well. I'm also opening up talks with education directors and leads to bring them back to the table in terms of this education reset table to ensure that there is that communication back and forth in terms of all these different areas. I know COVID has really stunted a lot of this work that needs to happen, but I know we're going to find some new ways, new opportunities to work together. And I echo Chief Corsten's comments. You know, we need to be one on this in terms of work together, but also be respectful. Like that was said, an opportunity for an opt-in, opt-out. You know, we have to have that respect for many of our individual First Nations or education systems that are happening. You know, bilateral tables that are out there. How could our reset table, who has the minister, the deputy minister, Christiane Fox, and you know, the ADMs there that are going to be signing on to our terms of reference with this reset table. We want to ensure that we just set the stage and pave the way for our leadership, who are the true rights holders, to really engage in this process. So we're looking forward to working with you on this. And yes, so we have the terms of reference there and for your review. So there lies our presentation for Education Reset. So we look forward to working with everyone. And also those of you on virtual, we look forward to hearing your questions or comments. And with that, I'll turn it over back to our chair. Chimigwech.
Thank you, Deputy, for your presentation. So this time we're going to open the floor to any questions on the presentation, and then we're going to look at the resolution. Women's Council, Brenda Fox.
Hi, Julian Faulkner. I'm Brenda Fox on the Women's Council. I have a question on one of the pages on your presentation, the one that your report card on that says complete. I guess it's more of a recommendation when this table is restarted that that report card should not be accepted. If these things are not done, and they document them as done, and they're incomplete, they should not be accepted by any organization, especially First Nation education. And also further going into, I didn't sit at this table when they did the health. I know that we hold health, and I know there will be time, another meeting for the chiefs to come. Again, I want this to be noted, is that in order for us First Nations to really unify and move forward, we need to start taking ownership on the stats and data of everything, from even birth. You know, the other thing that I always think about is that one of the greatest rights, traditional rights, was taken from us was the birthing of our children. It happened at home. We don't have that anymore. So anyways, with that, that's one of the things that I wanna bring up, is that somewhere down the line, if we really want to take over, we're going to have our own public health system and our own education. And in order to do that, in the government, is that you have to have stats and data. And also the other recommendations that I have always seen, and it's always the coroner's recommendations, and I see that, and it always seems to be brushed aside as I know the next topic is going to be opiates, and I'm just going to throw it out there right now, is that there was recommendations with the Romeo Wesley inquest that I think really has failed our communities, because there was mental health and issues that we really need to look at. And during COVID, it really showed the lack of. So I just want to bring those, and I just want to note those, and really it wasn't just a question, it's more of my recommendations for these tables that are going to move forward, that they're noted, and make sure that that the respect of, I don't want to accept something for my children or my grandchildren. If there's something that's not done, I want it done right.
And thank you.
Miigwech.
Thank you for that, Brendan. I just want to add to your comment to say that the reason we took the time, and Deputy Grand Chief instructed me to take the time to show you the report card and its flaws, isn't so Aboriginal Legal Services had no funding to do this. They had a summer student working on it. And we were looking at these 400-page documents, and we have people from the Education Department honestly working towards making these recommendations mean something. But with the government moving slowly and an inability to track them, they get away with stuff. And so your point is very well taken, and going forward, a huge issue at the reset table is have meaningful evaluation of outcomes. Meaningful evaluation of outcomes, no nonsense. Thank you, Brenda.
When you say that the government was moving slowly, they were still moving when we were in COVID.
That's right.
Just
So the presentation that was made is also going to be made available, because there is a short briefing note on the reset table, but there was more presented that was not in the briefing note. So any more comments from the floor? Floor recognizes Matthew Andrews. And then we'll go to Jason.
Yeah, Matthew Andrews, proxy for Wawagabon. I just have a question pertaining to the resolution that's called for forming a Chiefs Committee on Education. As far as I know, we did have a committee before. Maybe it would be advisable to share why the former Chiefs Committee was dissolved. I know even one time when we were on the Chiefs Committee, we almost got dissolved too. So I was just wondering if you could kind of what will be different this time around for the Chiefs Committee.
Thank you, Matthew, for that. And yes, we want to, in terms of doing this, move forward. The way it's going to be different is, tomorrow is a new day as well, and I wanted to make it open to get more direction from our education councils, education department leads. Because those are the individuals, in my opinion, those are the knowledge keepers of education. They live it every day. They're the educators. Those are the ones that need to be helping to guide the process. And also the fact that our chiefs, I've always said that, and I've always maintained that we're just listening to the fact that, they really care. It's appalling the state of education systems across Nishnawbe Aski Nation territory. I'm even reminded of Chief Achinipaniskam's declaration of emergency regarding education earlier on this year. That shouldn't happen. And I think that the Chiefs Committee will have an opportunity to get to the root causes of those challenges, but also maintain that it have an opportunity to give direction, new emerging direction in terms of our processes moving ahead. I know there has been, over the past years, I know the Chiefs Committee was dissolved. I think it was part and parcel the fact that I know that many of you, of course you are very busy with many of your roles, and I think the Education Committee was streamlined to ensure that there'd be still work to continue to happen, but also it would be able to come back to the main assembly as well. But in terms of looking at all those different areas, we want to learn from some of the challenges we've had over the past, but also have an opportunity to reset, to really look at ways on how we learn from the past to really move ahead for the future. And this is what we want to propose, in the work that we did with our Chiefs Committee on Children, Youth, and Families. I think that experience and work and that attention and respect to chiefs in detail will create an opportunity and a pathway moving ahead. So we're totally looking towards you too, Matthew, on your expertise in education, and also work with your chiefs as well in terms of how that would best fit with your communities as well in moving ahead. So we're looking forward to having those discussions with you on a better pathway forward. So big much for your question there, Matthew. Chief, do you have a question? Chief Wesley? Oh, Jason. Oh, sorry, you do. No, sorry, I apologize.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just wanted to point out that the terms of reference is very nicely drawn up. It's geared towards defining the role of this Chiefs Committee. These are old folks like me. I don't see any linkage here directly to youth who are impacted by education. There should be some kind of official recognition in the terms of reference that defines the roles of the youth who are the target of our education initiatives. There should be something in there that where they influence the Chiefs Committee directly. Right now we don't have that. They're part of the system. There should have some kind of responsibility at that level. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Exactly, I totally agree with you 100%. And yes, when we're drafting in terms of reference, we want to make sure that it's well-rounded and leaves open opportunities for our chiefs to engage. And also, we made mention too that the membership also has the Ishkadza Council, a member from the Ishkadza Council on this Chiefs Committee to get there. Bottom of page 2 of the terms of reference also includes the Ishkadza Council, as well as our elders and also our Women's Council members as well, because we know the structure and governance structure of Nishnawbe Aski Nation really tells us to really include those very important voices in moving ahead. And we're a work in progress as well as we're moving ahead and establishing this Chiefs Committee. And we'll always be looking for opportunities to change and evolve as well. So, Chimigwach.
Floor recognizes Jason.
Thank you, Chair. Jason Batiste, proxy, Chapleau Ojibwe First Nation. Congratulations, Chief, on reintroducing this important work. My question is with regard to the broad applications of RQ. And not that our communities are against RQ, we think it's a fine idea. But we talked about this, and we had a very, 3-4 years ago, Julian, you were there, we were talking about, Grand Chief, I think you were a member of the staff at the time,
Yeah.
when we were talking about the application of RQ, and when it's appropriate, when it's not. And defining and helping people like me understand when it should apply, what it should apply to, how it affects folks, and not just throwing it in broadly as an idea that's always going to work, because we know it doesn't. So I just, I understand that the work of the RQ table is still ongoing, but I'm concerned that I've probably seen it 3 or 4 times now in the last 2 days, where there's the notion that it's simply going to apply. Well, I think from our community's perspective, it only applies when it's appropriate to apply. And it has to be explained to the communities, if you apply it, this was what it means to you. If you don't apply it, this is what it means to you. So I just be cautious about thinking that, it's a formula that instantly gets instituted because somebody said it was so during the development of a proposal or an idea. And we pushed back on that last time, and not to take away from the folks that need the money, but in an effort to understand what that means specifically to individual communities. So please just be cautious about the broad notion that it's already going to apply, because in our view that hasn't been agreed to yet. We haven't even seen the final formula at this table. The RQ work isn't done. We don't even know what the formula is. So to suggest it's going to be introduced to this education thing, I don't even know what that means, because I don't know the X, Y equals what. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Jason. And we are, in terms of the education reset, those are different areas that we want to be cognizant and respectful of, different regional experiences, regional realities. And you're right, the RQ work is still ongoing, but also is taking in consideration variables of each of our regions that be respectful of those different cost analysis of those particular areas. And that's why the work that we're doing and proposing at Education Reset will take into consideration, take direction and mandate from our chiefs and our regional partners as well in moving ahead. So I'm enthused in the fact that there's going to be opportunities for that discussion, those discussions regionally as well.
Thank you, Chief. And if I may, Chair, just a brief rebuttal. One of the recent things just last week that happened to our communities is somebody decided that we were already serviced by under the paramedic proposal that Nan was putting forward. And I think it's a wonderful initiative. But somebody decided that the Waban communities were already serviced. Mm-hmm. We don't have those services in our community, so we were pulled out of that, right? And further, we didn't. If the RQ applies to things like that, and we're out of it, then it just. So that's why I'm cautious. You talked about how the parameters of those formulas work. Mm-hmm. So and I use housing as a specific example in policing, or any other service. The notion that the road access communities have housing available for folks to come and live when they come to service as a part of our bureaucracies. Mm-hmm. We don't have housing, but yet we're not included as a part of a formula. It's kind of, well, you know what, you can go live in Timmins, or you can go live in Kirkland Lake, but that's not the same as being a resident in our communities. Yeah. So we're under the same limited housing capacity, but that parameter might not be taken forward in determining how the RQ formula applies to road access community. So I just wanted to make those points, Chief. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Jill, you want to say?
At the risk of completely poisoning the well, Jason, I wanted to directly address what you're raising. The idea is to evaluate challenges faced by remote communities, and the way that it's introduced and referred to in the education piece is to evaluate whether it has a role. It's not to presume it does, and I want to emphasize that the actual work works on the basis of a continuum. So a perfect example is road access communities. The basis of the work being undertaken by Canada's experts with NAN experts is a StatsCan point allocation for remoteness that does not have like a light switch. You either remote or you're not. If you're fly-in, you're remote. If you're road access, you're not. It actually works on the basis of a score allocation. So in fact, the Waban communities get a sort of a sad score on remoteness because of the access issues you just described. So while I get what you're saying and completely accept the guidance you're giving and direction you're giving, that one size doesn't fit all and don't automatically apply it, I just wanted to give you some comfort that the research that's being done right now is all about a continuum and all about one size doesn't fit all. And I just wanted you to know that. And moving it to the education piece, the cost of housing and building in your communities, right? That is a direct assessment piece done for your area. So not for fly-ins, but for road access. And then that's added to consider, okay, what is the actual needs for funding? But I hope that helps. I don't know. All right.
Thank you for those comments. The floor is still open for additional comments on the presentation. If there isn't any more comments, we will go into the resolution, presenting the resolution. Do we have a copy of it on?
I am here.
Has Chief gotten a
Yeah,
copy?
they all have copies.
Okay, so apparently you do have copies of the resolution in your packages? Or was it just handed out?
It was handed out an hour ago.
So if we can get the resolution on the screen, that'd be great. I don't see that there's any other comments. Any on the screen? Bruce? Okay. So there is a comment on the virtual, so if the technicians can put Chief Bruce on, there is a question. Comment from the chief first, then resolution. You're on.
Good day, Chiefs, Deputy Grand Chief. I just wanted to applaud your initiative to move forward with a reset on the education jurisdiction and the negotiations that will be happening. I encourage this to be moved forward in an open timeline for the chiefs to monitor and to get objectives set so that we know that what is the end game for the chiefs in the Nishnawbe Aski community for our children. Far too long that we have had an inadequate funding and education systems with no support at all. The Indigenous Services Canada is the board of directors for the education system. For us, that has to change. We have to have these support systems for our communities. So I applaud the initiative to move forward in a open, transparent, and with milestones. And the last thing I wanted to ask was that that there be some objectives there for our students that are missing out because of COVID, or in my case, a lack of infrastructure in the community to catch up on education, where they are with their curriculum and where they are with their education levels, so that they may have a chance to latch on to other education systems in urban centers or wherever they may go to school in the future. Miigwech.
Thank you very much for those comments, Chief Achini Paniscum. Yes, the work is needed, and the time is now. Like, our students and our support mechanisms need to be coordinated, especially in the urban centers as well. We've negotiated resources as well in terms of to support our children and our youth and our families that are living in urban centers. Yesterday I talked about even like the advent and the support mechanisms with Band Rep and the First Nation representative services, and how a lot of our support institutions could also support our students who are living and pursuing their education in urban centers. And I am coordinating with also education directors from various tribal councils as well to look at those specific needs and how those priorities should also be brought to this NAN-specific table on education reset. And I'm looking forward to having a discussion with you and everyone here with your own education systems and your education priorities, and how that could also fit, or how could Nishnawbe Aski Nation also support those initiatives at home. So looking forward to working with you too, Chief Achini Paniscum, on your priorities and how we're moving ahead with this education reset table. Miigwech.
So the floor is still open for any additional comments. If not, we are going to go into the resolution, and the resolution has been handed out. The This will give the mandate to the executive lead on this file. So I don't see that there's any other questions on virtual. Okay, so the resolution is now up, and I believe it's 04, I think. Don't quote me on that. So I'll go over the whereas. Whereas Nishnawbe Aski, Chiefs in Assembly have passed Resolution 0628 on reserve education funding, which recognizes education as an inherent and treaty right, including the right to exercise local control and jurisdiction over education. Whereas NAN must treat education as a priority in order to provide its young people with the opportunity to realize their potential and develop into highly skilled, knowledgeable, caring citizens who contribute to their communities. Whereas NAN Chiefs in Assembly passed Resolution 0773, education funding for on reserve, which mandated the creation of the Chiefs Committee on Education, CCOE. Whereas Chiefs in Assembly later passed Resolution 1905, dissolution of Chiefs Committee on Education and revised terms of reference for the NAN Education Committee, which dissolved the CCOE, whereas the terms of reference for CCOE have been revised pursuant to the direction of the Chiefs in Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that Chiefs in Assembly hereby re-establish the Chiefs Committee on Education and approve the terms of reference for the Chiefs Committee as attached. Dated at Thunder Bay, this, what day is it? 10th day, 11th day of May 2022, moved by Chief Jason Gauthier, Ms. Nabe Cree, she's in the room. Seconded by Chief Robert Nakachi, Fort Albany First Nation. Is he online? Can one of the staff check to see if he's online? No? Okay, he's not online, so I will need a seconder for this resolution before we can speak to it. I need a seconder. Need a seconder for this resolution in order for it to be discussed. Need a seconder. I will need a seconder, second call for this resolution. I will need a seconder in order for the resolution to be discussed. Huh? Yeah, he was virtual. He was off now. He's off, yeah. Someone virtual. Who's gonna move it? Which Sutherland? Okay. Chief Ramona Sutherland has seconded the resolution. So I will now go to the mover. Does the mover have any comments on the resolution? No comments from the mover. I was going to say the remover, but it's supposed to be the mover. Okay. And now I will go to the seconder to see if, does Chief Ramona Sutherland have any comments on the resolution? Any comments from her?
Miigwech. Yes, education is extremely important, and it's part of reconciliation as well. You know, the Canada used education against us, including torturing and killing our children. And I think it's very important that we, now that we have our education, that we use that education to not only uplift our children, but as well to uplift our communities. So I believe that we need to empower ourselves by embracing this education, as well to include our languages in those education institutions as well. So I'm going to say miigwech for this opportunity to second this motion. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief, for your comments. The floor is now open for any additional comments on the resolution. Any additional comments on the resolution? Any additional comments on the resolution? Second call. Any additional comments? Third call. I will ask now for a vote. Is there any abstentions for the resolution? Any abstentions? Any abstentions? Second call. Any abstentions? Third call. I see no abstentions. Any against the resolution? Anyone against the resolution? First call. Any against? Second call. Third call. Any against? I see none, so the resolution is carried. And I believe it's 04. So you want to say final comments?
Okay, Miigwech Chiefs, we're looking forward to working with you and your tribal councils also to really identify membership for the Chiefs Committee. So we'll be talking with you individually as well as our independents and in terms of moving ahead. I do want to also acknowledge our Director of Education, Mr. Andrew Solomon. I would like to invite to say a couple of words. Andrew? On the very important work that he's been doing with this particular file. I just want to give him an opportunity for a couple of minutes to address the Chiefs. So it's great to have him back, our Director of Education.
Miigwech, whatego mahanak, ministago ni kailangan mo tumik. Now, in the taman the gaginas kumi gagishaw bantoy ko ta. Asi kinaguskono kakono siniag sugamo. Ano siniag kay ano stay na stay tibine skramagen. Asano bono o magen anos kiko ganos tamago kanos skramagen teke. Igual maganos kagistano. Miga sagit tinama iginas kumik mina chitatsik ogo kamahanak chistago kishebatsugo kamahanak wina chigi ita shirchik dandigi tutgatego bandiganteke ganitan egichen naskuman. Thank you and good afternoon, Chiefs. I want to say thank you for passing the resolution, bringing back the Chiefs Committee on Education. We need that body. We need it to move forward with our file and in a way that we don't have to come back to this here. All we do is report back here as to what the changes we made through that Chiefs Committee on Education. The other thing is that I want to say is that we will continue on with the negotiations with creating our own education system through the Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs, CERNAC. Now we have another table where we could go with talk about the funding with ISC, Indigenous Service Canada. This way we have the best of the two worlds, negotiating on what we want to see on the on education system that we're gonna do. But the thing is, we could only go so much on the negotiation on there. We're asking your help now. We're asking you, the communities out there, to invite us to your communities, to tell us what you want on your education system. Because we have the ability, the capacity to develop those on your behalf, and we'll work with you to develop those on the education system, on the lawmaking side of the negotiations. And that's really important, that's really critical now, and that's where we're at with our negotiations. With this with this other table that the Deputy Grand Chief has created, and it's been really instrumental, is that the Minister Haidu is willing now to listen to your infrastructure needs, the community needs. What is it that you require? in order to fulfill those, because our negotiations, it's going to have an impact on when it comes to the fiscal, the money that's going to be talked about on the education system. What we need to show through this table that Deputy Grand Chief announced is that how much do we need? How much does it cost associated to run an education in your communities? We need to know that. And if we don't know that, well, we're not doing justice. We say education is a priority. Let's step up. You say, you talked about we're enough with talk. We want to see action. That's what I heard yesterday. Well, work with us. We only facilitate this process of the education system that we want to create. NAN is there just to help facilitate this. But we can't do it without you. Because once what we see and vision is that the system is going to be on its own. Not us, NAN, taking over, not us being there. But it's you coming together, united, and running your own education system. Because this is it's been talked about since 1999. So we're 2022 now, and it's really critical. We heard the inquest. We can't lose sight of the recommendation. We can't lose sight of those 7 youth. Let's honor them. And there's others that when they were trying to exercise what anybody wants, to aspire to be a professional. In order to do it, they need that education, and they have to leave our communities. And that's the task that Jews have to come up and ensure that the safety of our students are there. We could only do so much in working with Jews. But with that, I just want to say, amigos, and we'll see you. I hope to come to your communities. We'd love to see you, and we'd love to listen to your what your aspiration is in the education system. Amigos.
Thank you, Andrew. Sure.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Deputy Grand Chief and Julian Faulkner. Just a quick announcement before we start again. So on May 26th at between 9:30 and 10:30, that's Central Time, Eastern Time, there's going to be a virtual setup Zoom meeting, Doug Ford, and it's going to be organized by COO. So save that date if you want to get him up against the wall there. So that's May 26, 9:30 to 10:30 Eastern Time, virtual set up through COO. So at this time, I'd like to call upon Deputy Grand Chief Anna Betty and also Dr. Dirk Heyer on the next presentation, which is the opioid crisis. So, Deputy Grand Chief.
Thank you, Connie, and good afternoon, Wache, Miswe, Magayak, and those ones that are joining virtually. So, what we're going to do in this particular presentation, and this was, we're going to be providing. Dr. Dirk Heyer is going to be doing a presentation. As many of you know, he's the Chief Coroner of Ontario, and there is a process in there where the information on opiate deaths is documented within as one of their roles and responsibilities, and he's going to provide us with that information. And afterwards, it's been requested that we shut off the live feed as we go into our solutions and talk about our next steps. Okay, so just to let the IT staff know. But at this time, I'm going to call upon Dr. Dirk Heyer, and I also would invite our representatives from Nishnawbe Aski Police Services to come to the front as well. Okay. Thank you.
Now I have a clicker. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Deputy Grand Chief. Thanks for inviting and thanks for the honor of being here. Obviously talking about a very tragic set of circumstances relating to the loss of lives from substances, specifically opioids as well as other stimulants. And you'll note that I'm on pandemic dating. I have May 11th, 2021 on my presentation, so I apologize for that. I'm not going to go in great detail through all of the presentation, but I think you're all receiving it, and so you can review and see the additional information, and certainly reach out to me if there's any questions or further information you'd like. I want to leave time for the conversation that Deputy Grand Chief had talked about. Am I clicking? I think, there we go. Push it, hold it. I have to be aggressive. So I think first and foremost, I want to recognize that while I talk about a lot of numbers, talk about a lot of cases, and these are individuals. Each person is represented, was an individual, was a member of a family, was a loved person, was somebody who was within community, and these are extreme tragedies on all of the deaths that are from a preventable cause and are often in very young people. I also want to acknowledge that working together with the Chiefs of Ontario under the OCAP principles and ensuring that we think about those and abide by those principles and from the sovereignty of the nations. And the numbers today are obviously, again, something that is specifically relating to NAN communities as well as the areas around NAN communities. So the regional chief is here. I am working together with Chiefs of Ontario, again, to think about identity, mortality data relating to this and other aspects. I'm going to pass by the work that we do. Most of you know the unfortunate involvement of our office when tragedies occur. And do want to just stop for a minute on this slide, which speaks to how do we define substance-related deaths. And we are speaking today about deaths that occur from the immediate effects of the drug or a substance. It's not included in these numbers would be people who suffer consequences of use of substances over a period of time. Those aren't included specifically in here. These are events where suddenly would be often called as an overdose. These would be the typical, these would be the numbers that we're talking about today. So this is a view into substance-related death, but not the full view of what occurs over people's lifetime. So in Ontario, during the, whoops, now I went too far. Sorry. In Ontario, over the period of time during the pandemic, there was an 80% increase in the number of people who died across Ontario from opioid-related deaths. 2,819 people died. And some areas of the province were much more affected by a rate perspective, and the north, both the northeast and the northwest, were substantially, significantly affected as an increase during that period of time. So we know this is an ongoing and a significant problem, and we recognize now that about 90% of opioid-related deaths occur from fentanyl, and that being not something that's prescribed. So the majority of deaths are not from medications that are prescribed to people. Again, I've talked about this. I'm not going to spend time on this particular slide, but except to also recognize that we're seeing an increased number of deaths that are not solely related to an opioid, but also that we're seeing cocaine and methamphetamine and more. And over the period of the pandemic, we saw now 62% of those deaths have stimulants as well as an opioid involved. So I want to turn now to provide a perspective of across Ontario with the information that we collect when we're involved in a substance-related death. We do ask for in the period of time prior to August 2021, we collected ethno-racial data and collected Indigenous identity. We didn't subgroup the identity we had a pan-Indigenous approach, so the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation are all together in this report. Up till August 2021, we are collecting specific identity after August 2021. But this data talks about what's occurred over a 3-year period of time. And I'm going to turn your attention to what you'll see on the most left of the graph, and those are the Indigenous identified deaths that occurred over the period of time between 2018 and 2021. And don't need to see the numbers per se, except to see that it is significantly increased to 232 across Ontario in 2021 compared to 68 in 2018. And that number is increasing at a greater rate, a terrible thing, compared to other races. Specifically, the rate by sex and ethno-racial groups, the leftmost portion of the slide shows the Indigenous deaths across Ontario in 2021, and what you can see is the dark green is females and the lighter green is males. And in the Indigenous identified deaths, there are far greater proportion of females compared to every other ethno-racial group in Ontario. And I don't have a specific explanation for that, but we are certainly seeing that significantly, 3.5 times the rate of white and other racialized groups. This slide, I think, speaks to the age, and I'm not going to, again, spend a significant time on this except to note that the 56% of those who identified as Indigenous were in the 25 to 44-year age group. So this is a significant number of people lost at a very young age, and obviously at the primes of their lives, and a clear, another message of how important and how significant this issue is. I'm going to look just at the NAN communities in the surrounding areas, both in the Northeast and the Northwest, from the LIN perspective, or the Local Health Integration Network, which are dissipating, as you know. And this slide's very dense, but you can look at it later, and it speaks to the public health units. And at the top, that blue line compared to the orange line is the Thunder Bay District Health Unit, so the public health unit based upon the approaches of the public health units. And you can see a substantial, almost doubling number of deaths that occurred, or the rate has almost doubled over the period of time of the pandemic. So taking NAN communities, I don't need to tell you how to identify NAN communities. And what we looked at was specifically within the communities themselves in the period of time during 2018 to 2021, and these were deaths that we identified as occurring within the community. There are, I'll talk in a minute about the number of deaths that occurred of NAN community members outside of the nations, but we still have seen a notable increase between 2020 and 2021, with 17 of the 23 occurring in the last 2 years, with fentanyl being, again, one of the most significant factors throughout. We do see stimulants equally as commonly in communities as we do in the rest of the province, which around 66% of the cases also had a stimulant present. This is a rate chart, and it's a bit confusing, but I just want you to look at the one graph that goes very sharply up is Thunder Bay, and I think, as you know better than I, many of the Thunder Bay deaths would be community members, as well as other First Nation members, but certainly we've seen a substantial increase in Thunder Bay itself. Timmins is the orange line, which is the next, that had a very steep line and then has flattened out a little bit. The yellow is the LIN, or the local health network, so that is all of the northwest and northeast, and then the orange line at the bottom parallels to the blue line, which is NAN communities in Ontario. So the NAN communities themselves, so the number of deaths that occurred in NAN communities would be consistent with the 80% increase that we've seen over Ontario, but Thunder Bay is by far driving much higher, as well as Timmins and the northwest and northeast. So taking what I would characterize as NAN community members are substantially increased across the north in the opioid world. This talks about stimulants, so these are the cocaine and methamphetamine deaths. Again, most of those do have opioids, but we also have seen approximately 10 deaths over the 4-year period of time. Those numbers are not increasing in isolation, but together with opioids, we are seeing an increasing number of deaths from those. And what I'm going to do is jump to those who are following along, I'm going to jump to the last chart. There's a chart which is 3 slides long, and just point out a couple of things, but again, I don't want to drill down look at too deeply into these, because I think that this is information that takes some time to digest, and it's difficult information. But if we look at the green, this section is those who live in community, and then the gray is those who live in the non-NAN communities within a NAN geographic region, so outside of community, but so Thunder Bay, for example, Timmins, for example. And you can see in the green what I've talked about already, which is the pre-pandemic and the pandemic period on community, and the increased number from 8 to 15, and again, females being overrepresented at 10 occurring during the most recent 21 months of pandemic period, with the average age being 35 years old. Building further with the non-NAN community deaths, we can see on the gray area to your left, which would be in the Indigenous, there's 99 deaths that occurred over these 2-year period or the 4-year period of time. And of those, again, a significant number, 51%, were female, compared to the non-Indigenous, which is consistent across the province of being about 22%. Again, the age being younger in Indigenous in the NAN communities area compared to the rest of the province. And of overview of from our numbers and our evaluation, 17 NAN communities have been affected by at least one death, and I recognize that that's a person, but from what certainly affects the community more broadly, and affects the nation more broadly as well, the Nishnawbe Aski Nation. And these are people who did have primary addresses or who died within the community. So I think at this point, Deputy Grand Chief, I think I've provided an overview of the tragedy that we're seeing. Always, our office comes after tragedy, of course, and what we're trying to do is provide the most effective way to let people know, specifically you as Nishnawbe Aski Nation, but individual communities and other We've done similar presentations with Grand Council Treaty 3, and provide an understanding and the best way that we can to talk about the characteristics that we see and the trends that we see through this work to try to inform potential intervention or potential solutions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heyer. It's always, you know, he's been a person that I have reached out to often to help me in terms of the work that we've been mandated to do. And, and we had met back in December at the time when we were you know, in the process of collecting information. And he had, at that time, you know, agreed to provide some documentation in terms of, you know, for Nishnawbe Aski Nation. So I think each and every one of us here in this room knows or has lost someone from an overdose, or a person that is, you know, stuck in that place or in that place of struggling with addictions. So in the next process of our presentation, we're going to be talking about some solutions and recommendations, suggestions, also having some discussions from and feedback from the leadership. So at this time, we are requesting that